Hey, Tanya,
Hi,
are you
man,
there?
they're really cutting it close. I just got it at 4:45 for 5 o'clock.
Yeah, well, here's the problem. We always have people who sign up really late.
Yeah,
So if we send the invitation too early,
yeah.
then we have people, like trying to get on, going, hey, I can't get on, or I tried to get on, which is why we put it at 20 minutes.
Well, I don't know. I've talked with Erica about it. We can do a number of reminders. You can do any number of reminders with that. And, I know one of my events, people signed up 2 weeks in advance, and then the link didn't come out until 20 minutes before the event. And they weren't even around because they signed up 2 weeks ago. So we've got to.
Well, I mean, they can put it on their calendar, that they signed up for something.
Well, I
So,
lost half of the attendees though,
well, I do think
because
that that's
everybody's so crazy. Because I do that. I sign up for things, but unless I get a reminder. But Erica's on top of it. I talked to her because we can do, what I mean, we can do a sweep. I mean, we can do one like 2 hours before, and then we can, what I mean, we can have a
yeah.
couple scheduled. So anyway,
Well, if that's, we'll talk.
yeah.
Let's talk about that at the next staff meeting and just say, hey, it will probably make people feel less stressed if they get something 2 hours before.
Well, the thing is that we're in competition with so many that people forget.
Yep.
I mean,
No, believe me, I know it. I
I
know
mean,
it.
I forget, and so when I get, if I get it, I'd like to get it like at least that morning of the day, because then I'm planning, and then I
Mhm.
don't, and then I wouldn't mind getting another reminder. But if people sign up late, we can do one more round.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should be all good. You're all dressed up.
Well, I mean, I have to dress up for these things. It's basically this thing I got for campaigning, which is kind of a soft blazer,
Hmm.
right? And then I actually put a necklace on.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Like I'm totally not. I managed to lose one of my favorite earrings yesterday, and I'm really pissed. Something
Oh,
earring that, well, here's the thing, is those earrings that hook through but don't have anything to stop them, and between scarves and coats and hats. And I was sitting down yesterday and I suddenly went, where's that earring? And I looked through all my scarves to see whether it had caught. I looked at my coat, I looked up here. I don't know. I'd been at the office, and I'd been at the car place, and I don't know.
I I don't wear earrings that much because my ears get so itchy. But when I used to wear them, I would wear them and then take them right out. But I haven't worn them like for a year.
Oh,
Well,
no, I like my earrings, but I tend to be very boring. And so when my cousin sent me this really pretty pair of earrings at Christmas, I was like, wow, um, they're really nice, and they were light, and they dangle a little bit. But these, I love these.
What are
See,
they?
they're Silpata. Here, let me see if I can. They, oops. So they do this thing where you can close them up and you can open them up. They have like a little, so you can't lose them,
That's
which
nice.
is good for someone like me who's apparently a boob. I have an entire basket of one earrings. I'm just gonna like put in an additional hole, I think,
You
and
should put
just,
one in for your one. Plus, you have short hair, so I've
yeah,
always had longer hair. You can't see it anyway.
yeah, yeah. You don't
Unless
you don't wear your hair back at all. Ugh,
well,
just sick of my
I
hair.
haven't had a haircut in over a year, which was okay because I had a haircut that was way too short. I was everybody loved it, but I'm like, it's just too short. So
Yeah, if you're used to it.
it's grown about that much.
Wow.
I do want it above my shoulder. Once it starts getting below, it gets too tangly.
Yeah. Yeah, I stopped having long hair, gosh, in college. I just it kind of just, I mean, we came from that generation of you have to have long hair, right? But I have so much hair.
Yeah, but you've got really nice hair.
Oh, it's
You
nice, but there's a lot. There's just a lot.
yeah.
I mean, and
But
it's
you could
super,
have your hair long. I
yeah,
actually even
it's super thick.
hi Nathan.
Well, we don't want to talk about hair in front of Nathan.
I know.
Uh-oh.
He's got good hair. That looks like good hair.
You have good hair too, yeah. We're talking about haircuts.
Yeah.
Oh, it all
Hi
looks
Nathan, I'm
good.
Mary. Nice to meet you. I should probably change my name.
I'm
There.
Mary.
Yeah, Nathan, I was just fussing because we got the link at like 4:45. I'm like, yikes.
Oh, I figured that's how they were doing it. I got it. So we're all
We
good.
need to fine
Yeah,
tune
hey,
it so
we
can
got
get
the
a
speaker
little
here,
early.
so that's good.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I
and
talked to Jessica Vander Ark. She'll be here. There's a good crowd of people who will be here.
Yeah. Well, and I think I must have gotten your bio, so I'm gonna kind of do a little overview, but I'm assuming that you'll give us a little bit too.
Yeah, that's no problem. I can do that. And if it's okay with you, if I perhaps communicate to folks that we'll just save questions for the end.
Yes.
That way things will kind of be a little bit smoother and we won't be start and
I
stoppy.
always like to do it. The last panel we had, my wonderful moderator decided not to do that, and it messed up the whole thing.
Yeah, you really
Don't
have to save them.
Questions after every panelist. No.
Yeah, it's
Tanya, and
definitely
then
hard with Zoom.
and then we try to keep the last 15 minutes of this for breakout sessions, just so people
I
can
don't know how
chat.
to I don't know how to do that.
I do.
Okay, you can do that.
But I actually need to look and see what they, oh, because you opened it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look down at your menu, you see breakout sessions?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all you do is you're going to say, hey, folks, we're going to divide people. And when you click on breakout sessions, you can say, kind of depending on how many people we have, no more than 4 in a room.
Yeah.
And you would just put that number in, and then you would just click them.
Okay, so I don't put people in, it puts people in?
Yeah, I can do it. Why don't you just make me a co-host?
You are a co-host.
But my breakout sessions aren't showing up. So make me the host then.
Oh, okay, there we go. Yes, I do. Hopefully I won't be sneezing. I've been taking Stevie Nettles for my sinus because I've been really plugged up, but it's
February.
the opposite effect. It makes me really sneezy.
Yeah.
Drippy.
Yeah. It's
But
just,
I'd rather be sneezy and drippy than stuffed up. So
oh well. This is someone coming in with a beautiful background.
yes.
Mark Fitzpatrick. That is not a real background, sir.
That is a real background. Well, it's a real photo I took. I'll put it that way.
The Grand River, Chief Hazy Cloud, where?
Grand River, north of the stadium. You know Bruce and Becca Lang?
Sure do.
They live on the river. That's from their front yard or backyard, I guess.
Their yard that's too close to the river.
And it's going to be too close in about 2 weeks.
Yep. Though I was surprised, we were downtown Sunday, and I was surprised at how little ice was in the river downtown. There just wasn't much.
Really?
Do you have a lot up in Ada?
I can put a picture of winter blizzard up there if you would prefer, but this
No.
That's okay. We know what it looks like.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. I keep saying, at least we're not Texas.
I know.
We
Yeah.
got heat. I have a niece who lives in Houston, but she was visiting North Carolina, and I seriously doubt if she's back yet because the airline keeps saying, nope, nope, you're not going.
I
Yeah.
would like to reach out to my uncle and ask him how he's doing, but I'm not sure I want to because I have a feeling he voted for all the folks who made this happen. So
Probably. And they're just doubling down. Rick Perry got all bent out of shape, the former governor of Texas.
Yeah,
About how you don't want to join the grid. God forbid you join the grid and get controlled by the feds or be like the other 49 states.
well,
Well, I suppose Hawaii's not on the national grid.
all you have to do is fly to Cancun. It's not a big deal.
What a
Sorry.
dream.
I'm just getting snarky in my old age.
Oh, is that the excuse we're giving these days?
Somebody who will remain unnamed just from Texas flew to Cancun. So
Oh, yeah. No, I know. I was referring to the snarky thing that you're blaming old age on that, Tanya.
Well, I think it's partly true. Yeah, I had
It's
a
just that we don't care what people think anymore.
exactly. I had a
We ever.
milestone birthday a couple years ago, and I'm like, why am I always trying to please everybody? You can't do that.
Right.
I'm tired of that. But I
Well, we
I
should
do
have
like-
people popping in here in a
do we
minute.
have some.
How's work going, Mark?
Real busy. Lots.
Yeah?
I've had to back away from a couple other groups that I'm pretty active with and was trying to get me to help with other things and strategic plans, and
Ooh,
so I have to cut it way back, working too much. And then I haven't had really a day off since all this started in the year, and haven't taken a real vacation in about 3 years. So
oh, yeah, you need to learn to say no.
yeah, I gotta be paying a little bit more attention to me. So I'm saying no and canceling a lot of stuff out. And
Good.
so, but it's good. I mean, we got a lot going, and the hard parts, like everybody else faced with the COVID, you just can't plan. You want to do all these things, and you can't get them on the agenda, and can't create activities, and
Yep.
open.
Don't believe me.
And so
I hear
we
ya.
spend a lot of time saying, "I'm sorry, we can't do it. Sorry." But we're keeping, and then I still got people laid off, so.
You're doing a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
Well,
Made time for green drinks.
thank you. Appreciate it. Hey there, Bill Wood.
Hey, quick question is whoever's running this meeting, keeping an eye on the waiting room in case we get stuck in one of those, like we have to admit people situations?
Mhm.
Okay, just
Yep,
wanted to double check.
It pops up if anyone's in a waiting room. So,
All right.
I have a.
but I think I did it with waiting room off. Oh, I'm drinking grapefruit sparkling water.
Oh, I'm definitely having a Sweetwater Street coffee donut porter from One Well in Kalamazoo. So
Oh, okay.
I was taking green drinks literally here.
I just have my favorite blue glass with water, so.
Hey, Tamara.
Well, there's no obligation, of course.
Hi, Tamara. Hello.
I see a Jennifer Flynn coming in. Yeah, I set this up so that we didn't have to do a waiting room.
Okay.
Well, I think I do that for like half the Zoom meetings I schedule, though. It ends up happening anyway. So I have learned to not entirely trust the no waiting room clause. But
Yeah.
I see people popping in. So all good. Just
Yeah.
wanted to double check.
It is all good. Who else?
I always do a waiting room because it makes me
Mhm.
choose a waiting room or a code. I think makes me choose. one.
Yeah. So anybody who doesn't have their videos on, this is a social event, so you should put your videos on if you want. And Jennifer is on without a camera.
I don't have a camera, but hello. I'm happy to be here.
Well, happy to have you. I see Hannah Maiko. I see apparently a Tsarina of Russia. And Samantha and Kyle. We have all kinds of people.
Good.
Anybody
how's
who
it
has a
going?
camera who wants to put it on. Yeah, Bryn's gonna let her dog out and then he's gonna want to come right back in.
Mine are banished away from the picture window, so hopefully they won't bark at everything that walks along the road.
Hey, Mary, should you share that University of Purdue study, though, on the
On
energy
video?
of camera versus no camera?
Yeah, apparently using our video cameras, according to Purdue, is like a huge amount of energy.
I just had someone share that with me today.
Yes.
So I feel okay about not having a camera at this moment.
Yeah, but as someone pointed out on our staff, that it's just like having a conference call then. So
Yeah, and I think the important thing, I don't know if it's a huge use of energy compared to say like leaving your heat at 75 all day, but it was a huge use of energy comparatively to not having it on. Also, streaming in SD, like standard versus high def, was a huge difference too, which I was surprised by.
Well, I'm pretty sure my laptop doesn't have high def on it. So. All right.
Surprised there's not more options to stream in standard or high definition on Zoom. You know, like all the other streaming services we have.
There are no options, or there are?
I don't think there is options. That'd be
Yeah,
nice
I've
if
never
you just,
seen
you know,
anything.
downgrade it and still have video on, but
Wonder if
Yeah.
there is a comparison though, if I was gonna go drive somewhere for a meeting.
I
Yeah,
would
there-
imagine it's no contest that
Yeah.
Zoom wins on that one, unless
Yeah.
you're driving an EV, you know, like a plug-in or a hybrid or an EV or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would imagine even then you're still using a lot more energy, I would think. But I don't know. I imagine we'll see these studies start to come out, since it seems like the entire way of meetings has been shifted, probably ultimately for the good in terms of like cutting a carbon footprint.
True. Well, it's about 5 after, Tanya, so if you want to take it away.
Well, certainly. My name is Tanya Kabala, and I'm the Lakeshore Outreach Organizer for West Michigan Environmental Action Council. There's other staff members here who may or may not want to introduce themselves, including the Executive Director, Bill Wood. I am over in Northern Muskegon County, being the Lakeshore Outreach Organizer, and I've been here for a year now, since last February, and very excited to introduce Nathan Ayers, who's going to talk about agroforestry, and encountered him because we're doing a series of forestry presentations, and he popped up and wanted to talk about what he was doing, and I grabbed him for the green drinks because I think this is something that is really exciting. It's agroforestry is a way of combining, in fact, kind of recombining farms and forests, because I think this is the way things used to be. Not everything in our world was compartmentalized like the way that it is now. And Nathan is an expert and consultant on that. He actually is the executive director of the Chihuahua Permaculture Research and Education. Did I say that right, Nathan?
You sure did. Great job.
Yeah, partnering with a number of universities in Michigan. Also the founder of We Are the Forest, which does nature and STEM science curriculum for K through 12. And then also a consultant for businesses and landowners. And I believe you have a brand new farm that you're going to be employing some of these techniques. But it's a really fascinating approach. And I think it's something that it's really kind of inspiring and hopeful as we look to kind of recreating our communities with better principles and values. So Nathan, did you want to get started there?
That sounds great to me. I sure appreciate it. Thank you, Tanya. I'll hit the little screen share. and
Yeah,
that
I
should
mean,
work. My
do
desktop.
you have it?
I should have it here. Yep.
Okay.
And if folks can stay muted during the presentation, then we'll do some Q&A when Nathan is done with his short presentation.
It's giving me a little issue here. I hit share screen. Let me see here. Let's try that. I'm just sharing my Safari. Is that working?
Yes. we're
People
getting
can
there.
see that. Let me do a full screen here. Okay, how's that? Okay, wonderful. Yeah, well, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, my name's Nathan Ayers. I'm the director of an organization called Chihuahua Permaculture Research and Education. We're primarily based out of Ann Arbor in Southeast Michigan, but I've been doing work all over Michigan for the last 10 years. So I want to give, firstly, a big thank you to Tanya for bringing me into this event. As was mentioned, I attended another event that Tanya hosted a couple weeks ago with Rod Dennick, who's the district forester, tri-county forester in Oceana and Newaygo and Muskegon. And I want to give a shout out to Rod as well, because he's been very helpful in helping to get some of this agroforestry enthusiasm happening there in West Michigan. So although I am coming to you today from Ann Arbor, as Tanya mentioned, I recently purchased 20 acres in Oceana County. My mom has had a place in Oceana County for almost 20 years now, so I've been going to Stony Lake for that long. But really, I'm a born and raised Michigander, and I'm excited to share a lot of these things about agroforestry with folks tonight. So I'll do a quick little overview and goals for us. So I'll do a quick little background on sort of some of the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years. And then really the big goal for tonight is to define agroforestry and start to illustrate a lot of the problems that we're seeing in agriculture and how agroforestry is uniquely suited to solve many of these problems we're seeing become ubiquitous within our agricultural systems across not just the US, but the entire world. We're gonna dive in onto the 5 primary agroforestry systems as they're recognized by the USDA. And you'll hear me talk about the USDA a little bit tonight. When I first started teaching this stuff 10 years ago, we didn't have quite the strong support from the USDA that we do now. And it's been really wonderful to see. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on tonight. I'm gonna talk about some of the leading practitioners and demonstration sites in the US and in primarily the Midwest, one in particular that we'll be talking about. And then we'll sort of finish up talking about other agroforestry organizations in the Midwest that other folks can get involved with and learn from. The USDA has done a really tremendous job the last 5 or so years doing a lot of community-based research and figuring out how to best implement agroforestry, particularly in rural environments towards the goal of rural economic development. And I have some thoughts on that as well that I'll be sharing at the end. Then we'll do a quick little snapshot of what's going on in Michigan. And then hopefully we'll have enough time, 15, 20 minutes or so at the end for some discussion and maybe even some breakout groups. So I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what I've been into for a little while. How I got into all this stuff was really as a kid. In 1985, my dad got a brilliant idea to buy 100 acres on the south end of Beaver Island. And I've been going there ever since I was about 5 years old. So I learned in the raw remote forests of Beaver Island about cutting trails and identifying trees and figuring out what was edible and starting to play around with mushrooms and things like that. And so that's sort of really what my foundation is just spending time in the forest. Professionally, I got my permaculture certification in 2009 in California, and immediately began talking about permaculture to anybody that would really listen. Slowly, after a couple of years of doing that and giving lectures and things like that, I got picked up for about 3 years of research projects with the University of Michigan, where we spent a total of about 4 years integrating permaculture into the University of Michigan, where it still is today. I have spent a lot of time working with different K through 12 schools and municipalities, figuring out best practices and how to sort of integrate this stuff into not just curriculum, but also sort of city infrastructure and things like that. So I do a lot of consulting with just landowners, farmers, businesses, you name it. In 2015, I created a different program called We Are the Forest. And this is really primarily for city kids to start to get outside more. And so we call it a Nature plus STEM based program. I'm a huge advocate of STEM education, but I believe that nature plays a really important role in STEM that is a lot of times overlooked. So the We Are the Forest program is very active now. We're currently funded by the National Science Foundation via the University of Wisconsin. And we do a ton of work with many of the leading statewide conservation and STEM education networks. A lot of those are very active in West Michigan as well. So a quick shot of me in my element, that is on Beaver Island, one of my favorite places to be. I think at that time we were planting some windbreaks for some fruit trees that were behind that setup there, but all within a Frisbee toss of the big lake. So that's really where my background and passion and all this stuff is. I'm really passionate about education and getting this stuff in front of kids. I think STEM education is a really powerful vehicle for permaculture and agroforestry. And I'll share a little bit more about that as we go on tonight. So let's start with some basic definitions. Agroforestry, the intentional integration of trees and shrubs into crop and animal farming systems that ideally create environmental, economic, and social benefits. it has been practiced in the United States and around the world for centuries. And that's coming from USDA.gov. And I really like that the USDA is acknowledging the fact that these systems are not new. When we start to dig in a little bit deeper, really what we're talking about here are the native and indigenous agricultural practices found not just in America, but around the world really. And so, you know, this idea of agroforestry is not new. What's in a name, agroforestry, agroecology, permaculture, we're really talking about a lot of the same things. Sometimes it's called forest farming, sometimes it's called a perennial polyculture, but what we're really getting at here is mimicking what's happening in a forest ecological system. And so that gets into good biomimicry as well. Finishing up with a little quote here from the USDA again, agroforestry-like practices have been in use in North America for a long time, but were not called agroforestry. Native Americans had many complex management systems to produce their food, baskets, clothes, home, fuel, medicine, etc. The European settlers mimicked a lot of this as well, integrating trees, crops, and livestock as they worked with native woodland vegetation and agriculture. But what happened in the 20th century is we thought it was a really good idea to start to separate all these different elements and put them into different programs. And really, ultimately, this has led for us as kind of a lot of social and cultural folks that are in cities to be separated from where our food comes from, where our energy comes from, really being disconnected from the land. So as we're starting to see a lot of those, you know, the lack of fruits from those practices come into focus now, we're starting to look backwards at a lot of these practices like permaculture, like agroforestry. And really the key to all this stuff is almost just doing the opposite of what we've been doing for the past 100 years with agriculture. So as a lot of our modern agricultural practices look like annual monocultures, things like corn, soy, wheat, and you know, these systems have served us for the time period that they've been in place, but I think they're coming to the end of their cycle as we'll start to talk about some of the ecological problems. But really, when we're getting at a good definition of agroforestry, the key in all this stuff is switching to perennial crop systems, diversified perennial crop systems, and then integrating these perennial crop systems with animals, with grazing, with pasture and things like that. So the key, and you're going to hear me say this time and time again tonight, the key in all this stuff is diversification and integration. So getting into some of these problems that we see when we start to look at the agricultural landscape in the United States is these annual monocrop practices really have resulted in great losses of habitat, pollinators, native species. Topsoil is a big one. The USDA thinks that we're losing around 1 billion tons of topsoil every year. But getting into the food quality and things like that, demineralization of the soil, which leads to less quality food, less nutrient dense food. And then, you know, sort of the infrastructure issues around flooding and aquifer pollution. And then of course, as we're seeing more and more on a yearly basis, all these algae blooms in Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, places like that. It was only 3 years ago that the folks in Toledo were told not to drink their water because of the algae blooms in the Great Lakes. And so there's a lot of scientists that have directly correlated this back to our agricultural practices and sort of nitrate runoff and things like that. So these are some of the ecological problems we're facing with our current agricultural systems. Economically speaking, these systems are also marked by heavy subsidization and debt. When we get into crop insurance and things like that, it's prohibitively expensive for a lot of farmers to maintain their farms. Not only that, we're seeing less and less folks go into farming. So that's a serious economic issue that we're going to have to come to grips with at some point. But getting into some serious economic issues, even just away from the farm, the products that a lot of these farms are producing when we get into heavy refining of processed grains and things like that. There's a lot of scientists who are saying that this is at the sort of foundation of some of the health crises we see in America. University of North Carolina in 2018 said that 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, relating that to sort of dietary and lifestyle choices. So these are huge economic issues that are pretty directly correlated to our agricultural practices. Then again, just sort of getting into the infrastructure issues around these farms, horrible flooding in the Midwest 2 years ago, destroying a lot of different crops for that year. So these are some of the economic impacts of our current agricultural practices. Then the one that I tend to focus on a lot is really just education. We have this thing called nature deficit disorder now. That's a recognized disorder by the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And so that's getting into kids that really don't spend time at all in nature, very rarely go outside. I start to ask myself questions like, what will the jobs of the future be if all of our human work is going to be replaced by machines? I'm a firm believer that we need kids that are connected to nature, that are connected to place where they live, that feel at home being outside, and that understand how to work with nature in order to solve a lot of the complex problems that we are facing now. So, you know, I don't mean to paint a grim picture here. This, I promise, is a inspirational talk tonight because we get to transition now into the solutions that agroforestry promises when we're talking about how we might go about solving some of these problems. But you can think about the 3 E's: ecology, economy, and education. And my work as a practitioner is to focus on agroforestry solutions that address all 3 of these E's. Take a quick drink here. I am drinking nettle tea from my backyard, in case you were wondering. Folks gave a share earlier. So let's talk about some of these solutions here. There's 5 main ones that the USDA and a lot of these agroforestry organizations start to focus on. They are alley cropping, forest farming, riparian buffers, silvopasture, and windbreaks. And we will start to dive deep into each one of these, beginning with alley cropping. And I'll mention that all the graphics I'm going to use tonight for these 5 systems come from the Savannah Institute, really fantastic organization based out of Madison, Wisconsin, that's leading a charge to get agroforestry education into all kinds of places. But their graphic design folks are fantastic. So I use their graphics for this presentation tonight. But alley cropping really, you know, the name of the game in this stuff is starting to diversify our farms. So this might be a solution that we would see in traditionally annual monocrop farms that want to begin to transition to agroforestry. So we start to diversify the revenue streams by adding tree crops, high income bushes, things like that. These are all planned out through a number of years, but really it becomes a much more efficient use of the farmland to diversify. We're going to start to diversify the crops that are grown, and we're going to start to integrate those crops together into one complete sort of ecosystem on the farm. We know that these types of farm practices sequester much more carbon. They actually help to build topsoil when we get into good perennial polyculture systems. They help a lot with pest and disease suppression by providing all kinds of new habitat for pollinators and native species and things like that. So alley cropping is one of the, I think, most productive transition practices that folks that want to start to get into agroforestry can implement on their existing farms if they want to transition from annual monocultures into perennial polycultures. Forest farming would be the second area that we would look at in terms of recognized agroforestry practices. And this is really the cultivation of specialty crops under existing forest canopies. So diversely, if we're looking at an existing forest and want to get into more agricultural production in that system, this would be forest farming. And this is really a lot of the permaculture methodologies that folks are talking about with perennial polyculture, forest gardens, and things like that. Similarly to alley cropping, this is all about diversification, but we're really starting to get all kinds of complex systems in sort of that soil food web, the closed loop system of a forest where there's no waste, where you know, the output of one system becomes the input of another, and we're getting highly diversified, more resilient systems out of a forest. So we get into mushroom production, certainly get into animal forage and things like that, but getting into specialized crops that exist underneath an existing tree canopy in a forest. As I mentioned, this is a lot of what we talk about in permaculture or perennial polyculture systems. We talk about the 9 layers of the edible forest garden, is the slide on the left there. And really we're talking about stacking a forest full of production at every different level, you know, from the canopy all the way down to the mycelial levels that are underneath the soil. We want production happening. We understand that it's an ecosystem that is closed loop. The output of one thing becomes the input of another. And we'll sort of focus in on this particular design right here. For anybody that's been trained in permaculture, this should look familiar to you. This is a design from Bill Mollison's classic Permaculture Designer's Manual. But the species have been transitioned to our Midwest ecosystems here. So if anybody is looking for a I won't say silver bullet, but I will say a magic key into getting started into agroforestry. This slide right here will save you a lot of time, will save you a lot of money, and will save you a lot of heartache, because there are all kinds of ways to start to diversify existing forests and start to integrate and develop more palatable, edible species in this system right here. So all kinds of fruit going on there, all kinds of medicinal species, but then we can really start to diversify, even bringing in chickens, and there is room for annual crops like greens and things like that within these perennial polyculture systems, but highly diversified, highly complex in that each system is dependent on each other. The output of one thing becomes the input of another. Moving on to the third system of agroforestry practices is riparian buffers. And these are strips of permanent vegetation alongside a stream, lake, or wetland. And really the key takeaway when we're talking about riparian buffers is how do we manage water on our agricultural landscapes? How do we keep water on the land? How do we keep water flowing? How do we keep the aquifers moving so that we don't just have tons of runoff every time we get a rain event on our farms? And riparian buffers are wonderful because they add a ton of biodiversity to existing waterways and things like that, creating new habitat. You can start to diversify the crops that you're producing, really protects crops from all kinds of flooding and things like that. But really, again, the takeaway on this systems is how can we start to think about different ways of managing water on our farm landscapes? There are a number of different ways that we can start to think about this. Another way that is sort of in this same frame of mind in terms of managing water on the farm landscape is called keyline design. And keyline really uses the existing topography of a farm to catch, store, slow spread, sink water slowly on the farm. So we would use the topography to create a system of ponds and reservoirs so that every time it rains on that farm, we're going to catch and store every drop of water so it slowly sinks into the aquifer, and the plants that we're growing have a battery to drink from. It's a beautiful system that I think starts to make a little bit more sense once you get it really tracked out on the appropriate topography of a farm. A lot of folks would think maybe this looks similar to terrace farming, and I would agree with that, certainly. We utilize a special kind of plow called a keyline plow. The keyline plow has a series of about 8 to 12-inch shanks that go in the ground for subsoil plowing. And really what this does is allow for water percolation to happen there, integration into the system rather than just surface runoff. But we start to stimulate the soil food web. And that's really important when we get into good agroforestry permaculture systems, is we want to utilize the soil food web that's underneath us. So many agricultural practices today just kind of practice a type of ecocide where the soil is just kind of destroyed underneath us using all kinds of fungicide and pesticides and things like that. But we know that good, nutrient-dense, high-quality food incorporates the soil food web to be a key player in that food production. So that's what this system of keyline design really gets into. And then when it's integrated appropriately with good agroforestry, we have nice key lines on topography, perennial polyculture systems that are there integrated within the system. Okay, and so moving on to the next, number 4, silvopasture. And this is the agroforestry practice that I think a lot of folks get excited about, because this is really where we start to get interesting systems that put livestock in the forest. So it's the intentional integration of trees, pasture, and livestock managed as a single system. And so you've heard me say this time and time again, but it's all about diversification and integration. We're diversifying the production of timber and tree crops, forage, and livestock. So the folks that are doing this are seeing really increased profits because of that diversification. It's a way better use of land in terms of maximizing what's capable on the land, but getting into good biomimicry when these systems are done well, utilizing things like cows in the forest or pigs in the forest actually mimics a lot of the disruptions that we would see from native ecosystems, such as burning of different kinds of prairies or the oak savannas or things like that. We can mimic that disruption with animals and actually continue to produce topsoil in successive ways year after year. So this silvopasture system, I think, is one that a lot of folks are interested in. We're seeing a lot of folks in Michigan get interested in putting pigs in the forest. I know a number of different farmers doing that. When we get into good silvopasture, there are some elements about thinning the canopy a little bit so that we get good sunlight penetration to the forest floor, because ideally we're going to be transitioning into some type of forage, whether it's native grasses or a combination of grasses for those animals. So there's a sort of special mix of trees, but also allowing the right amount of sunlight to come in so that we can integrate those animals and their food systems appropriately and together. So that's silvopasture. There's a lot of folks around the US and the world, for that matter, starting to look at systems very similarly to this. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the regenerative agriculture movement that's exploding around the country, as well as sort of the rotational grazing, mob grazing techniques that lots of folks are talking about. Number of wonderful movies that have come out the past couple of years. Kiss the Ground is one that just came out recently. I think that came out on Netflix. And then additionally, there's one, The Biggest Little Farm, which came out a couple of years ago. Really fantastic movie if you get a chance to see that one. Talks about these practices of regenerative agriculture, rotational grazing, but a lot of this is silvopasture as well. So two leaders I would point out to folks. One is by the name of Gabe Brown. Gabe is out of North Dakota, and he's sort of seen as the regenerative agriculture master that's transitioning, large scale ranches, 1,000, 5,000 acre farms into these regenerative perennial systems that have rotational grazing on them. Gabe's organization is called Understanding Ag, and they do a lot of wonderful education across the country as well. So that's Gabe Brown. And then if you've seen any of these movies in the last couple of years, you certainly know who this guy is. He's known as the Lunatic Farmer. That's Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms. And Joel is certainly leading the charge, not just in the United States, but around the world, towards highly diversified agroforestry systems that incorporate value crops as well as animals in a forestry system. I just can't emphasize Joel's role as a leader, as an inspirational leader in this movement. You can see from his eyes there, he's typically fired up about this stuff, but highly recommend all of Joel's books. You can find a ton of podcasts by him. He's all over YouTube, but he's another example of somebody who's doing this and integrating these systems and having a ton of success with it, both professional and financial. And then so moving on to the fifth and final system of agroforestry, and this is really sort of an enhancement type of system that's getting into windbreaks, which are strips of trees and shrubs designed to enhance crop or livestock production while providing conservation benefits. And really the name of the game when we're talking about windbreaks is creating microclimates. We want to address a lot of these issues that we're seeing on farms, like erosion, like loss of topsoil, like loss of nutrient density from the soil. And so when we get good windbreak systems in place, we're blocking that wind. We're mitigating the damage that happens from rain events, really creating new habitat a lot of times as well, which is hugely important for farms. There's a lot of wonderful areas in West Michigan, particularly in Oceana County, that have fantastic examples of verging on old growth windbreak systems. So these are fantastic examples. They work, but it's all about creating a microclimate on that farm where we're creating buffers, we're creating barriers to the production, but also really protecting the crops and the workers that are going on there. So windbreaks would be the fifth and final sort of recognized practice of agroforestry. So this is all wonderful. Where can we go and see this stuff? Where can I go in Michigan and see this stuff? Well, we're working on that. We have to kind of look at it in terms of regions. In the Midwest, there is one farm and one farmer in particular who is head and shoulders above everybody, and that's Mark Shepard, who's in Viroqua, Wisconsin. His New Forest Farm is really the model that I think we should be looking to here in Michigan in terms of integrating agroforestry practices and rotational grazing with animals. Mark has a really awesome book called Restoration Agriculture that came out about 3 years ago. Many, many videos on YouTube you can find about Mark. He's one of these characters that will let you know exactly what works and let you know exactly what he thinks about what. But here's a nice shot of his farm. And really, again, he's had about 30 years to develop this. So we're starting to get into well-developed forest succession, highly diversified. Again, you can see how, his rows are on topography. They're on the curve of the landscape, so that every time it rains on that farm, every single drop of water is caught and stored and utilized for maximum productivity. Highly diversified farm, highly integrated farm. But in those spaces in between tree crops and things like that, he runs animals, he runs cows, he runs pigs. And Mark has really wonderful videos on YouTube. I can't recommend them enough. The thing that Mark says about this system is that he could walk away from it right now, in 1,000 years, it'll still be producing food. And that's permaculture. That's designing for 7 generations. That's designing for long-term success. Is that when you get these perennial polyculture forest systems up and running, they need far less work. And really, we just become harvesters and foragers and grazers, rather than the sort of traditional amount of energy and work and intensivity that's found on a lot of farms from year after year. But Mark could walk away from this system and it'd still be producing for 1,000 years. It'd still be regenerating itself every year. It's a beautiful example, and one that I think us in Michigan should be looking towards. So this is kind of a goal for us, that we can start to transition into systems that look a lot more like this. So getting into some of the organizations that are doing wonderful education and research around agroforestry, highly recommend the Savannah Institute. I mentioned them, based out of Wisconsin. And there's also the Association for Temperate Agroforestry. They're really unique in that when you go to their website, they have some regional working groups, but they are a bit more of a national organization, whereas the Savannah Institute is primarily focused on integrating agroforestry within the Midwest. But both these organizations come together for a national conference every year, which they just announced last week, the 2021 North American Agroforestry Conference, happening June 28th through July 2nd. They're just put out their request for proposals and things like that. So anything you can think of that might be agroforestry related, from research ideas to education ideas to demonstration, things like that, I highly encourage folks to get involved with this conference that's happening. I'll hopefully be presenting at it around agroforestry and STEM education. But these are the 2 big organizations I would send folks to really start to get a feel for how you might incorporate agroforestry in your life. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about all the amazing work we're seeing coming out of the USDA. I'll back up here a little bit and share some personal stories. So I got involved in the local food and farming scene around 2008 in Southeast Michigan. Myself and 5 other women started an organization called Transition Ann Arbor. And this was an organization that was part of the worldwide Transition Towns movement, looking at how we could sort of decrease our dependency on fossil fuels and scale up towards local resilience. So this was the time when, these big food stats started coming around, and I heard that statistic that the average American meal travels 1,500 miles from farm to plate. And I started to get real interested in food and food systems, and just saw very low-hanging fruit, as it were, to make huge strides and improvement in agriculture. And so in 2009, I went out to California and took my permaculture design certification, and just completely had my mind blown. I started to understand how we can mimic nature in the way that we redesign our food systems. And I came back to Ann Arbor in Southeast Michigan and started talking about permaculture to anybody and everybody that would listen. But the thing that was interesting is when I started talking about permaculture in 2009 or so, you kind of had to be a little bit careful about who was in the room sometime, because these systems were seen as almost heretical to traditional large-scale agricultural practitioners. The thinking behind that, and I certainly understand it, was, who are you guys to come around talking about perennial systems when we know that, it's these annual monocultures that feed the world every year. If we want to keep feeding the world, these are the systems that work. And then a really funny and interesting thing happened in 2011, where the UN, of all organizations, put out a report called Agroecology and the Right to Food. And that report was a 10-year-long research study that looked at small-scale biodiverse organic farms And they figured out that calorie for calorie, these small scale biodiverse agriculture systems outproduced traditional agriculture. And there was just this huge tidal wave, and you could feel the shift at that time that was happening around 2010, 2011 towards small scale biodiverse farming. And so really shortly thereafter, then the USDA started to change their tune and they started promoting agroforestry and these ideas. SARE, which is the USDA's sort of sustainable agriculture research wing, they started getting a lot more active, started offering a lot more in grant money every year towards these kinds of innovative approaches around permaculture and perennial polyculture systems. So this is all to say, it's been really wonderful to see the USDA get on board with these practices. And it looks like, you know, they've really put their arms around this idea of agroforestry, and it's here to stay in the USDA's wheelhouse. And so I support that and I support them, and I'm gonna keep on talking about the great work that they do. So there's actually a USDA National Agroforestry Research Center based out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And they're doing all kinds of research there every year about best production practices, innovative crop techniques, as well as all kinds of research on how to fund this and integrate this all across the Midwest and America. The USDA has put out a number of really fantastic research papers. This one in particular, Enhancing Resiliency in US Agriculture Landscapes Under Changing Conditions. Really wonderful report that they did. I think this one came out in 2018. As I mentioned earlier, I see agroforestry as a wonderful vehicle for economic development in rural economies, and so does the USDA. And they put out this report in 2019, Enhancing Rural Economies Through Agroforestry, Assessing Emerging Opportunities. Highly recommend that report. And then the strategic framework that USDA put out in 2019 looks at the next sort of 5-6 years and how we can really begin to implement this at a number of different scales, whether that's sort of going through our local USDA offices and county conservation districts and things like that, all the way into getting agroforestry programs at major research universities, community colleges, and things like that. So highly recommend this report as well. But all this to say, the USDA is on board with these systems. We have them as an ally. And so I think it's time to leverage the sort of strength and national prominence of this organization and really start to dig deep into the resources that the USDA has, because I think they want to be a partner in a lot of these systems and a lot of community efforts. And so I encourage that. And I encourage folks to reach out to their local USDA and conservation district offices and say, hey, what's going on with agroforestry? Are there ways that we can get education, demonstration going in our community? Because they're on board. And sort of winding down here a little bit, we'll do a little snapshot of what's going on in Michigan. I've traveled all over this state, Upper Peninsula, and all over for the past 10 years, visiting farms and different landowners. And there's lots of different farms that are implementing these practices. Some folks call it permaculture, some folks call it forest gardening, some folks are doing it in their backyard, some folks are doing it on 100 acres. I would say that there's currently no organized agroforestry community of practice or centralized resource access point in the state of Michigan. I see that as a void that needs to be filled. I see that as a niche that needs to be filled. But I really am an advocate for small scale community-based solutions. So the idea of sort of regional agroforestry working groups and hubs and things like that, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I'd be a little bit more hesitant on some sort of statewide agroforestry organization, just because Michigan is very diverse, even down to our soils in different areas and things like that. So I think it's all about small scale community-based solutions. And there's niches waiting to be filled for folks that can provide information to communities, because I think folks are hungry. I think farmers are hungry for ways to jump in and start to, experiment with some of these things. Thankfully, MSU is on board as well. Really, this is our agricultural research institution within the state of Michigan. There's two folks that really jump out, Julie Crick and Cable Thurlow, but they have a wonderful webinar that they put together on agroforestry that Julie Crick led. She's one of the foresters out of MSU, but there's resources at MSU, and I think MSU is hungry to partner and fund innovative projects around the state. So I'd also encourage folks to reach out to, MSU, different departments. And I think MSU has some cool stuff planned for West Michigan, coming out of Muskegon Community College and maybe one of the other community colleges in West Michigan. So there's momentum happening. There's opportunities for people to jump in, get involved, be leaders, start to implement this stuff on their land, and be vocal about the solutions and promise of agroforestry. So looking at the time, 5:42, we got about 18 minutes or so to get into some questions, get into some discussion. I'll prompt maybe a little bit here, just thinking about other opportunities for agroforestry education and demonstration in West Michigan. Some starting places would be to identify stakeholders and collaborators. Where are the low-hanging fruit and opportunities for education? Where are the folks that already have these systems going on, but maybe don't call it agroforestry, but want to share it with people, want to do tours, want to help educate people? But as I mentioned, I'm really interested in agroforestry as a vehicle for STEM education, particularly in K through 12 schools. I think that a lot of our rural K through 12 schools should have agroforestry STEM programs for middle school and high schoolers, because we need kids that know how to work with nature. We need kids that know how to get outside and solve problems that our communities are facing. So I'll just maybe finish up by saying, for those of you that are present today and want to go further, I would love to hear from you. You can email me. My email's at the bottom there, nate@wearetheforest.org. And if you've got ideas for, sort of starting to identify some of these regional areas of practice and stakeholders and collaborators, I'd love to start getting involved with folks and develop some working groups and things like that. So I'd love to hear from you. And with that being said, I want to thank you for tuning in with us. Green Drinks, I want to thank Tanya again for the opportunity, and would love to hand it back over to her. So I will put my screen share off. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, or I think you go by Nate, don't you?
Either one is just great.
Thanks. So kind of a very quick and focused overview of agroforestry. Do we want to take some questions now, or Mary? I know that we also wanted to go into breakout rooms.
Well, I think we need to take some questions. I
Okay.
think there's probably going to be some questions. Maybe if people could just put up a reaction, like a little, hand or something, if you have a question. Hey, Jess. And we'll just poke around and look. Oh, Bill has a question. Go for it, Bill.
Sure.
And then
Hey,
Mark,
and Nate, I want to say thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. I really appreciate your time tonight. I have a question that's maybe kind of ties into some of your prompts and maybe not, so I apologize in advance. But I just read an article that was about the 50th anniversary of New Communities Farm down in Georgia. That's a community land trust farm. It was designed to provide African-American farmers with the opportunity to get some agricultural opportunity, not have land kind of taken away from them in various ways. And I'm wondering, the same article also quoted that I think at this point, 91 to 93% of the farmland in the US is white owned. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on whether a land trust model with a permaculture or agroforestry operation on it, number one, if that would be a way to provide a better entry point for people who wanted to do this. And number two, if it might encourage Black, Indigenous, and people of color get an opportunity for those folks to have more access to farming and to permaculture. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's really important area to think of. I think what we're seeing right now are a lot of different models of land acquisition and management emerging. And certainly trusts are one of them that have proven to be successful for folks. As you mentioned, decades-long organizations working it. I think there are some interesting models emerging in even just like corporate ownership. So talking about these L3C models, which are sort of low impact, low profit, social impact organizations. So all kinds of opportunities for farmers to get their product out to the community. But when I hear you talk about getting more people of color involved in farming, I think the first thing we have to recognize is the majority of folks of color in the United States live in urban areas. So I do a ton of work in Detroit and Ypsilanti, and we have an uphill battle in terms of getting folks outside and connected to nature. So I think anything we can do to get sort of nature programming, place-based programming into our urban areas is really one of the first steps. But to see sort of STEM programming, career development, technical training, field days, field trips for urban kids to go see not just urban farms, but rural farms and things like that is going to be hugely important. I mean, not just people of color, but everybody in the United States, we're losing farmers. I think there's less and less people going into farming. So we need sort of systemic foundational opportunities for people to learn about this and know that they're possible. So I'm a huge advocate of getting these programs into schools. I think for me, that's the low-hanging fruit about getting people exposed to these ideas. But I think certainly there are organizations working fervently on alternative land acquisition and ownership models. I know the Savannah Institute is looking at that a lot. They're very concerned about that. So I would point folks to the Savannah Institute. I think they have some upcoming workshops specifically on land acquisition and ownership models, looking at trust models. I want to say that one's coming up in a couple weeks there. So hopefully that would start to answer some questions about where to start, is to look at what the Savannah Institute is doing around land acquisition and trust ownership models.
Great.
Thanks.
That's
Does
awesome.
anyone
Thank you.
else have
Thought I saw Mark.
questions?
I thought, Mark, did you have
Yeah,
a question?
thank you.
Okay.
And Nathan, thank you. You're actually picking away at some of my questions with your comments, and it's kind of fun to get them resolved. And one of those was looking at where in Michigan is this really an active practice? A lot of the books and presenters that you spoke of, I've seen it, Stewardship Network conferences and other things, and have some of those books. And it's a lot of Wisconsin and Oregon and other places. So really interested to what's going here. And then a lot of our local work is West Michigan, and a lot of your focus is East Side, not to draw that line again by any means, but certainly want to connect with resources here. You mentioned Muskegon Community College and one other college maybe. So if there's any way you could follow up or help us kind of tap, because it sounds like there isn't really an organization statewide, but these regional efforts are really key. And we have a lot of regional efforts dealing with stewardship, the conservation networks, education about getting kids outside, like you're saying. And so it would be really helpful to try and coordinate the networks that we already have in place with some of these resources.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know it's Muskegon Community College that is launching a new program in partnership with MSU around agri-science. So hopefully they'll be looking at a lot of these systems. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the other community college. It's another local one there on West Michigan. So just to interject a little bit too, is that, so I'm really interested in working with the conservation districts in West Michigan. As I mentioned, Rod Denig is sort of one of the district foresters there. I gave a presentation to him and he's like, we don't know about this, So I think getting this information that the USDA is on board with this stuff in front of the state foresters by region, by county is also going to be a really effective way to start to spread information. But count me on board, anything I can do to help, just say the word.
That's great. We have really good networks with some of those. So to bring in yourself or other presenters can really start getting some of that going. We're doing teacher workshops regionally. And so there's a lot of things we can connect. So we'll follow up with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Great. Anybody else? I'm looking, I'm scanning. So if I don't see you, just shout out a question you might have. If we don't have any more, this is Green Drinks. We do like to chitter chatter during Green Drinks and talk to each other, especially now when we haven't seen a lot of our friends for a while. So what I'd like to do is create, I don't know, like 4 breakout rooms, and I'm gonna just, you don't mind, I'm just gonna hit them, and you're gonna find yourself in a breakout room for the next 5 minutes with somebody you may know or people you don't know. So here we go. No.
Are we there?
I need more.
Everyone, are we
Good
back? We're
morning.
back. What are you doing with a landfill there, Jessica?
That's
You're a
awesome.
crazy girl.
Yeah, I didn't get to reply, Kyle, but yeah, thanks. It's one of my landfill shots.
Yeah.
Hey, Jessica.
Spice
Hey,
it up.
everyone. I know that we've hit the 6 o'clock hour, and Jennifer Flynn's putting some different stuff up there. Ooh, permaculture activist net permaculture design course. So we do have this recorded. So if any of you do want the recording, let us know here at WEMIAC, and we can send it out to you. But I can probably send out some of these nice connections too.
Hey, Mary, can I do a quick poll here of folks
Sure,
that are here?
absolutely.
Because we had a couple of folks in the last group, or at least one. If you're currently working in some form or fashion in agriculture, could you hit a reaction? Either give me a thumbs up or a clap, something like that. We got it. I knew we had a couple folks hiding out there. All right. I want to make sure that we do have an opportunity. I know that Nate put his contact information up a few times, but if you've got any further questions or if you need to get anything from him, reach out to one of us at WEMIAC. We've got info@wemiac.org, or hopefully, I know some of y'all got my email address, because we'd love to make sure that we were able to get in touch and keep this conversation going. I think we just barely scratched the surface tonight. So thanks. I just wanted to say that before this wrapped up.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thanks, everyone. Happy Green Drinks. Next
Nate.
month, we're going to be talking about gardening.
Yay!
Yay! Our very own Thea Van Gore is going to be doing a prepping for gardening, and we couldn't be more excited. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Safe.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Nathan. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mhm.